So I'd love to hear you talk about some of your new projects. I think the Sounds for Survival
Mhm.
and Laid to Rest were two of those pieces.
Yeah, happy to. Yeah, so, like I said, when I first conceived of choosing home, it was in relationship to this research I was doing in Windsor, North Carolina, related to the history of land ownership, but really like more deeply. It was like a study of origin stories and like
Mhm.
how far back can you go as like a Black person? Like what you know, if I'm trying to understand, um, which I always am, but especially at that time as I was about to become a mother, I wanted to be like, I wanted to feel fully grounded and have knowledge and be able to answer questions that came up about lineage and heritage and tradition um, even spirituality, and so I began um, on my father's side of the family, and the land that they came to own, but were originally enslaved people. Um, and so this was I call it the Speller Plantation. It was one of the largest plantations in the area. Um, and it's off of a road called um, Speller Ferry Way. It's still there. Looks like a brand new
Ah,
sign too, by the way. Anyway, that's a whole other. um,
interesting.
yeah, and off of a port to the Roanoke River, like little muddy path where now people kind of like fish and hang out, but um, African people were brought there to be sold, auctioned and sold into slavery. And so, that is where some of my ancestors um, arrived in this country. And it's like, okay, so that's as much detail as I kind of have, right? But
Mhm,
then,
mhm.
I wanted to understand the land. Like, what memories does the land hold? Um, like, what was grown on these fields? And interestingly, cotton is still grown there, like now. So my
Wow.
uncle acted as my guide because, it's my father and I have two uncles on that side of the family, and they are all like oral historians. I don't know how they remember, the things that they do,
Mhm.
but they are the keepers of family history. And so I'm really happy that I was able to do the project because it kind of um, archived a lot of those stories that would not have otherwise been archived. So that body of work, which I later named Relics of Home, includes recorded conversations, right? So that kind of began with our work. Um,
Mhm.
includes photographs of significant places on that land, as told by family members, not only my uncle, but other relatives that I had never met, kind of like distant relatives there. And there's some Polaroid, there's some video, and then there's some installation work. And so one of the pieces is my favorite is this um, cotton sculpture. I loosely call it a sculpture, but it's like this cotton plants that I sewed together. But my uncle yanked them out of the ground from like whoever owns it now. They were growing at the time, and he was like, "Yeah, let's take this." Threw it in the trunk of the car, and we like drove off with the quickness. Um,
Right.
but but the work later became, like finding a way to house these stories. Um, and so, Relics of Home is like this photographic body of work primarily, but then there are these separate installations. And so Sounds for Survival is one of those. And so the image in Sounds for Survival is a 40 by 40 black and white photograph of, it just looks like the woods, but it is an unmarked gravesite of ancestors, those that were enslaved and buried unceremoniously when they passed away. And there are other photographs that I haven't actually exhibited, that there was a chapel, there were other small grave sites, but I photographed these places. I wanted to know like where I could kind of lay all of my questions, all of my uncertainty about identity and where I came from, like if I could place it down somewhere. And so, so Sounds for Survival, that installation was created also in 2020, in the summer of 2020. And so it was after George Floyd was murdered. And so I was, you know, kind of like still thinking about this body of work, still thinking about, you know, identity and origin story and honoring history and ancestry. And then at the same time, existing within, I mean, it was just fire, right? Like the emotions and the city, like everything was ablaze. And I was at the time living a mile away from where the city was burning. I, you know, gave birth to my second child in 2020 within that. So it was like in the middle of the pandemic, in the middle of an uprising with the National Guard guarding the mother baby center with like huge, I don't know what kind of guns they were, but big guns that you have to
There was
walk
tanks in our city.
Tanks, yep.
Like
tanks
literal tanks in the city. And yeah.
Tanks rolling down our tiny residential roads.
Yeah.
So there was, you know, like rightfully so, a lot of there was a lot of anger, but I was also like I was also like nurturing a new being, and I couldn't really embody that at the time. Like I couldn't really engage in that way at that time because it wouldn't have been healthy for me and my family or this new baby. Like whatever is housed within me, I'm passing through to my baby. So I made the decision, I guess you can say, but really I think I had to like conjure a different future or a different narrative, or explore and put forth concepts of freedom and redistributions of power, and in like the embodiment of healing, right? And creating space for healing, specifically for Black bodies, you know, full stop. So for Sounds for Survival, I created this kind of like a space that for me was supposed to reflect Black spirituality. So I utilized reflective Black acrylic across several walls, and I had that black and white photograph, and beneath the photograph I had a pile of Black river rocks. So it was kind of like, this marks the spot where these souls landed, like the resting place of these souls, of this ancestry. And then across the gallery space, I created this soundscape of a woman singing Yemayase Su. And there were sounds of the ocean, some whale calls, and then because the woman who was singing was also a mother, nursing mother at the time, the baby is cooing and making noises and occasionally crying within it too. So within that soundscape as well. So that kind of like felt like where I was at and where I wanted to be, right? Like spiritually, like bringing together ancestry and nature, land, and like calling oneself out of negativity and into a higher place. And so I created this space as a part of a 3-person installation exhibition at the new Studio Gallery in St. Paul. I believe it was called At This Point in Time, or A Space for Contemplation. I think that's the whole title. So yeah, that kind of began this interest, and I'm still there in like challenging narratives, you know, and like really creating spaces that center Blackness and bodies that are considered othered, you know. Like how can we start there instead of like making it like this side story, you know. That's kind of where I'm at right now.
Yeah.
And you came.
It's a beautiful piece.
Yeah, you came to see it. Thank you for coming to see it in the middle of a pandemic.
Yeah. Masked up, put it on. I wasn't gonna miss it. I remember I came over straight from playing traditional lacrosse, so I got filled up first, which was good. And I sat in front of that piece for some time, and it's one of those pieces that gives you chills, you know. And you know when you have this undeniable bodily reaction to a piece, you know, it has another level of communication that can't be ignored, and that is important, you know. And I really, I think that when we stand in front of works like that, even if we don't understand them in every intricacy that the artist is thinking through and intending, there's an understanding that, you know, your body is having, and that, you know, obviously your mind is a part of that as well. But I just remember standing there and being like, this is a really important piece, and it's a really beautiful piece, and it's a moving piece, and it's a haunting piece, and it's a narrative piece, in the fact that, you know, damn well, if you've been paying attention at all, you know, the history that leads up to work like this, and why it's so important. And so it has that. What I am enjoying is I like hearing you talk about it, that you are like conjuring this future that is healing and beautiful, and this is the place where, you know, especially, you know, from the place of being a mother, and you're creating that at that time, you know, of new life, you know, within your family. And even, you know, your firstborn is still really young too, so all sorts of new life. And that's what we do as caretakers and nurturers and mothers, right? We have to do that. We have to create and then protect those safe spaces for our babies and our families. And yet at the same time, through the use of that photograph of that burial site, that history is very much there within the piece. You know, you're not denying it, you're not running away from it or pretending it's not utopian, I guess is what I'm saying. You know, like, you know, we may be hoping for these utopian futures, but the reality is you can't really walk towards, I don't think you can walk towards a healthier model for the future without acknowledging the past. And that's a huge, if not the largest obstacle we have in this nation and in the world, is until we fully tell our histories and our stories in all their honesty and all their truths, we can't walk towards the true healing, because we're walking on half truths. That's not going to get us to where we need. You can't ignore the cause of the problem and just treat the symptoms. We know that's a faulty model, right? And so I really appreciate that about that piece, that it's, that history is there, but you're creating and celebrating this beautiful, you know, possibility and future, you know. And so yeah, I really admire it. And I just really dig the fact that a lot of, you know, the work that, and then you've done this maybe you could tell us a little bit about your installation piece too, that one is that one is that one the Relics of Home
Yeah, all of it
title?
was a part of, yeah, all of it
All
was
of it is a part of that body of work?
Relics of Home. Yeah, it was, I think after I finished the kind of like photographic series, I call them kind of portraits of the land, I started to focus more on the audio that I had captured. And
Mhm.
I mean, there's still also what I haven't done anything with yet are the documents, all of the documents that, came from um, what is it called? The registrar, Office of Registrar. So it's like all of the documents going back to when things were handwritten, like of like
Mm.
the transfer of land, from one person to another. So I went as far back as I could, and there were some names that we recognized and some names that we didn't. My grandmother was in there when she got it back from it. She got some of the land back. It was about to be auctioned, and it was always, people were not able to pay the taxes on it or something like that, right?
Yeah.
Financial
Yeah.
hardship led to the land or pieces of the land being sold off little by little over the years.
Mhm.
But so I started, kind of focusing more on the stories that I was being told about the family, because that's why I landed like, so this like quest for an origin story, like I landed on like, okay, like it's my origin story also, it also lies within my memory, right? Like
Mhm.
it is it's um the components that um that I experienced growing up created who I am as well, right? There's
Mhm.
generational memory,
Mhm.
like that I believe transfers through DNA, but there's also this other active part, which is my memory, right? And
Mhm.
so, but like hearing all of these stories that I had never heard from relatives, like my great aunt Lottie was somebody who I talked to a lot and I recorded a lot. And so she was my grandmother's sister. Um, I had never met her prior to this project.
Wow.
Yeah. And it was amazing because she sounds exactly like my grandmother. So that was super healing.
Oh.
She exactly
Oh.
with a little bit more of a like a southern twang accent,
Yeah. That's
because
beautiful though.
yeah, I was like, whoa, you sound like my grandma. I could just sit here with you all day long.
Mm.
And then she was telling me about her upbringing, about her work in the Purdue chicken factories, and how she got like injured down to the bone with scalding water, and like her travels, her 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 family, her mother and father. And so the installation that later debuted at the Plains Museum is called In Lottie's Living Room. And so that was a part of the high visibility exhibition. And so that was the audio for it was her talking about how her father was poisoned um, because of jealousy of how he was perceived by white men who owned land and his ability to get work on that land. His friends put battery acid in his drink and he slowly died over the course of an evening. Um, and so she's telling me that story, that she recalls him being brought in to her house, into brought home by these friends, by his hands and feet being carried to the back room. Um, and she remembers her mother asking like, what's going on, what happened, so she's recounting that. And the installation is a structure, kind of like a skeleton structure of a house, with a picture of her sitting in her chair with all of her pictures of her family behind her. There is the audio that plays on a record player on a shelf. There's a cotton bouquet that hangs from the wall. and then a portion of a couch, kind of like a couch cut in half, that leans within the space as well. And so it's kind of talking about this, fragmented histories, fragmented stories, and fragmented understanding of self. Um, and also like myth and memory too, right? Because
Mhm.
everybody, it was interesting, there were other family members that were there and they're like, so there was no dispute that he was poisoned to death, but the reason was in dispute. So one of the reasons had to do with another woman, so there's all of this, speculation about why. So I was shocked by what was up for debate and what was in question and what wasn't. Like the fact that he was poisoned, not in question, but like why he was, that's in question. That was shocking to me. So, and also, it was never reported. There was still a distrust, obviously, with,
Mhm.
police. And so there was that part of the story in there as well. And that part I don't think is played in that installation, but I am trying to figure out like what am I going to do with all of these histories, and I'm considering just really like dissecting them into chapters and making, like an actual archive, at least for our family to
Mhm.
be able to like, go to a website and play and listen to, and, might be like some warning labels on some of those stories, but yeah, so that's what a lot of those installations kind of became though, it was like moments of reconciliation, archive, and honoring
Yeah.
the stories that weren't really mine to tell, but also helped create me, like they led to me.
Mhm.